Hey there. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., today up here in Kensington, Maryland, of course. I'd like to welcome you for our meeting today on called Energy Efficiency Buildings as a Pathway to Carbon Neutrality in the U.S. and China. Over my 21 years at working at the Wilson Center, we've done a lot of work on U.S.-China climate and clean energy, sometimes under the guise of called the Cooperative Competitors Initiative. This year, I'm jokingly calling it the Carbon Neutral Ox Meeting Series. So today, we want to talk about cities. And we all know that cities are the engines of growth for the economy, society, culture, industry. And they also generate nearly 40% of the world's global greenhouse gas emissions. And China, which for decades has been a booming urbanization country in the world, they generate some 70% of the world's carbon emissions. The United States, our cities emit about 36%. So the long and the short of it is, the world cannot solve the climate crisis without reducing and greening energy and buildings. And there's been a lot of experimentation and policy changes in the US and China on this. And if the two countries do come together and accelerate decarbonization in buildings even faster, it could be a total game changer for the world. Today, I have a group of people, except not my own screen, here I have a group of people here today who are deeply steeped in all things energy efficiency. We're going to start out with my first speaker will be Clay Nesler, and he's going to kick off highlighting the trends in building energy efficiency that can be pathways to zero carbon in the world, in China and the United States. He has decades of experience in this space and currently wears two hats, one as the global lead in buildings and energy at WRI's Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, and he's a VP for global energy and sustainability at Johnson's Controls. The second speaker will be my friend Carolyn Szum. Not that, Clay, that you're not my friend, but we just met, we're getting there. Carolyn, she's my go-to woman whenever I have questions about clean energy policies and things in China. She's a program manager at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And today she's going to do a deep dive into the evolution of building energy efficiency benchmarking. Now, some of you may say, benchmarking, that doesn't sound very interesting. I don't care what you think. You need to pay attention because the benchmarking tools and the analytical tools that she's going to cover are really key to help speed decarbonization in buildings in the US and China. Now, Jing Hou, who I've just recently met, I'm really excited. She also at one point was at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. She's at the China Association of Building Energy Efficiency, where she's the director for international cooperation. And she's been deeply involved in research in buildings, low energy cities, climate policies. And she's playing a really key role in our conversation today to talk about how does energy efficiency buildings fit into China's carbon neutrality goals, and what does this mean for China's building sector? So I'm gonna pull back and I'm gonna ask Clay to share his screen. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes, telling us their stories, sharing their insights, and then you in the audience, please see in the stream, on the website where you are streaming this video, that you can tweet and you can email us questions. All right, Clay, I'm going to mute and I'm going to let you take it away and tell us some stories.
Great, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to the Wilson Center for inviting me to participate in today's topic. Can you just verify that you can see my slides?
We can see your slides beautifully and hear you clearly.
Great, thanks. All right, well, what I'd like to do is kick off this great panel and provide a little background information on the role that energy efficiency has as a pathway towards net zero carbon in cities, obviously at the building level. So, a little bit of background information. Why are buildings so critical, and cities? Well, as Jennifer mentioned, cities represent, about 70% of the CO2 emissions around the world. And that's despite having only 3% of the land area across the world. So, why, the famous quote, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. Well, why do you focus on cities and buildings? Because that's where the carbon is. And in fact, 39% of global CO2 emissions come from buildings. And there's a couple real challenges with the built environment within cities. One is that 2/3 of the buildings that are standing today are still going to be here in 2050. And not all of them were designed to high green building standards, let's just say. And so one of our challenges is that we are not only going to have to very quickly build every new building to very high efficiency and in fact net zero carbon standards, but we're going to have to do something about the existing buildings if we are going to meet our goals of the Paris Agreement by 2050. The bad news is the renovation rate on a global basis is less than 1%. IEA has published data that says energy efficiency in buildings can deliver about 55% of the carbon emissions needed to achieve the Paris goal. It can do it with existing technology, and it can do it at a positive net present value. It's not a cost, it's an investment that pays back over time through energy and operational savings. In order to achieve the Paris goal, we have to essentially triple the current renovation rate to between 2.5 and 3% on an annual basis. And as if that weren't enough, cities are getting larger. Urbanization is certainly driving that, the rise of the middle class. So essentially by 2060, we're going to have twice the square meters or square feet area of buildings across the world. So that sounds like a lot. Well, how much is it? Well, imagine what you're looking at, which is New York City. Imagine building a New York City every month for the next 40 years. That's what we have to do. So this is not a little bit of energy efficiency. This is a lot of energy efficiency. So what is the pathway towards net zero? Well, in order to decarbonize the economy by 2050, we have to decarbonize our electrical grid, all right? And we have to do that very, very quickly. The Biden administration has put out a goal of zero carbon electricity by 2035. So that's very ambitious, and many countries around the world have made similar decarbonization goals for their electric grid. But we need to not just decarbonize the grid, we need to decarbonize buildings, we need to decarbonize transportation, and we need to decarbonize industry. Industry's tough. Very high temperatures are required in a lot of industrial processing. So we can electrify some of industry with high temperature heat pumps and similar technologies, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging. That may be where renewable natural gas comes in, or green hydrogen as a way of addressing that sector. Transportation's pretty easy with light and medium duty transportation through the electrification, e-vehicles, if you will, EVs. Of course, airplanes is going to be a little bit more difficult. Maybe we need biofuels there. In buildings, electrification means electrifying heating, space heating, water heating, as well as cooking in buildings. And there is existing technology available to do that. It's not as widely applied as needed, but there are breakthroughs. Heat pumps that work at lower temperatures, heat pumps that work at higher temperatures to provide heating for commercial buildings and institutional. So electrification is going to be key. But if we could somehow flip a switch in the United States, particularly in the Northeast, and turn all those gas and oil boilers into heat pumps, we would essentially double or more the amount of electricity needed to manage those devices in the winter. Right now, summer is peaking because of air conditioning for electricity, but that'll change. As we saw in Texas just a month ago, electric for heating can result in very significant demands on the electrical grid. So twice as many buildings, a lot of existing buildings. We need to improve efficiency by about a factor of 2 in order to not have to grow the grid in transmission, distribution, and generation. But that's actually not enough. The opportunity is to apply digitalization. Digitalization is smart technology, which allows buildings not just to consume energy, but to generate electricity through renewable energy, to store energy, and to be flexible and control the energy in sync with the grid. These four things I refer to as the four good deeds: decarbonization, electrification, efficiency, and digitalization. Now what I'd like to do is show a couple examples around the world of how you can apply the four good deeds to achieve or approach net zero. This is a building in Hawaii. This is a pleasant site indeed. This is Maui College. This is the first college in the United States to be 100% renewable on site, okay? It can island itself from the grid in Hawaii, which is generally fossil fuel powered through fuel oil, all shipped in from far away. And this is because the university system made a commitment to be net zero by 2035, and in following the governor's lead. This is the classic approach to existing buildings on the pathway to net zero. Basically, first, energy efficiency improvements, HVAC, lighting, new controls, 45% reduction across the entire campus on energy use. That's the first step. The second step, on-site renewables, 2.8 megawatts of solar PV, and even more interesting, 13.2 megawatt hours of battery storage. That sounds like a lot of battery storage, but that's because there aren't any feed-in tariffs in Hawaii. If you make excess during the day, and you do in Hawaii, it's pretty sunny, except the day we took this picture, you know, you don't get paid for it. So policy can be a big driver of net zero. In this particular case, we needed lots of battery storage. Once you have PV and you have storage and you have EV charging, you can put together a microgrid, and you can manage that facility off the grid. And in fact, in this particular case, they're selling services back to the utility: grid regulation, frequency regulation, spinning reserves, and getting paid very kindly for it. So $79 million in savings over the 20-year term of this particular project, and the first net zero campus in the United States. Now, let's go to the extreme opposite. Let's go to Trondheim, Norway, 65 or something degrees north latitude, okay? Couldn't be further from the equator and a hot, humid climate like Maui. This is an interesting building. It's in the middle. It's called the Powerhouse Bratorkaya, and it's an 8-story office building. Think of an office building, a traditional office building, and then slice through at a 24-degree angle facing south, all right? Then drill a hole through the middle of it, all right? Inside the hole in the middle of it, come up with a double enclosure facade, so that basically the building is about as insulating as a thermos bottle, okay? And then on the roof, put lots of solar PV, all right? Put on, you know, 30,000 square feet of solar panels. This is an energy positive building. It generates more energy over the course of a year than it uses. It generates enough excess energy to power 200 EVs. Over the course of its life, it generates so much excess energy, it recovers all of the embodied carbon in the materials and the reuse and recycling of the materials at the end of its life. It is plugged into the district energy system. It uses a natural refrigerant, super ultra low GWP heat pump using the water of Trondheim Bay to both heat and cool the building. It generates so much energy that it generates extra heat often, and it puts it into the district energy system. It also, you know, provides resiliency to the entire community, including a hospital next door. Super sophisticated controls means that only the right amount of lighting and air conditioning occurs for the folks there. Energy positive building at a latitude you wouldn't expect. Now let's combine those two. These are two great examples of net zero, and then let's drop into Shanghai in China. This is in the Channing district. This is the Johnson Controls Asia Pacific headquarters, designed by Gensler, the famous architect. And while it isn't net zero, it is essentially net zero ready. It was the first triple certified building in China. It is LEED Platinum. It is China 3-star, 82 points at the 3-star level, and it's IFC Edge Advanced rated. It uses 48% less energy than a typical constructed building in China. In that area, 4% of the savings came from a super insulating facade and low emission glass. 18% came from a central plant that includes water-to-water heat pumps. So we're not burning gas to heat water. We're actually using solar thermal plus heat pumps to heat the water, and a super efficient water chiller. It has very sophisticated air handling system with air distributed under the ground, as well as in a chilled beam or a chilled trough, which is much more efficient. It uses energy recovery ventilators to recover any energy before it goes out, and UV treatment to provide better indoor air quality way before COVID, actually. Lighting and electrical saves 12%. It has motorized blinds, it has daylighting, individual control blinds. It has PV on top. About 25% of the roof has PV panels, as you see. The rest is green roof, and it also has solar thermal to preheat the water. Finally, it has very low energy use in its IT equipment, its servers. It uses advanced data analytics. It integrates all the building systems together. So very similar to Trondheim, but also, so it has, zero carbon heating, but it also is very efficient in a hot, humid summer, which is what Shanghai is subject to. So I wanted to provide a couple case studies. It's always good to see what these things look like. We just need them to be more widespread. So looking forward to the questions and the discussion. Thanks
so much. So Clay, next time I go to Shanghai, I can kind of talk I'd love to get a tour of that building. It looks pretty amazing.
Yeah, glad to.
Oh, good. Yeah. So, so Carolyn, I think we're going to move it on over to you. And that makes me wonder side questions, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, pretty much a low carbon buildings?
Well, Jennifer, that's a great question. The Berkeley Lab campus is quite, I would say that our more recent constructions would be high performance buildings, but a lot of our performance levels are due to our amazing Chief Sustainability Officer, John Elliott, who uses, he really focuses on operational excellence across our portfolio of buildings. And he's using lots of data, advanced energy analysis, to continually ensure that our buildings are operated for top performance. And I watched a presentation he gave last week, and it was absolutely enlightening. So while many of our buildings are older, because of the way we operate them at the campus, we're achieving high levels of energy and sustainability performance. And that's a great question to lead into my topic.
Yeah, I was thinking so.
Yep.
Surprise question. Sorry about that. So you can share your slides.
Okay, let's see. Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Let me pull them up.
Yeah, because actually I could have interjected that I think when we first met, you were involved in a project on kind of low cost, no cost changes that buildings in Shanghai could do. I think, wasn't that what I think you were?
Correct. Yeah.
And so that was my introduction way back. Oh gosh, must have been like 15 years ago, about how I think the US EPA was involved, ICF Consulting, that was just looking at ways, low cost, no cost options, which we can get more into in the Q&A. Because I mean, some of the stuff that Clay was talking about, I think you need to spend a little money for. But anyway, not criticizing Clay, just observing. So here you go. Teed you up here, Carolyn. So tell us your story.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So I'm going to talk about new energy analysis tools that can cut energy costs and emissions in buildings in speed and scale in the US and China. So Jennifer, you set us up nicely for this. Energy efficiency retrofits are critical to achieving mid-century climate neutrality. Buildings in the US account for about 39% of our CO2 emissions, and an astounding 51% of China's total CO2 emissions. That blows my mind. And Clay mentioned this in his discussion. according to Architecture 2030, less than 1% of buildings are retrofitted annually. So we're going to need a substantial increase in the speed and scale of building energy efficiency retrofits if we're going to meet our mid-century climate neutrality goals. One of the key strategies to addressing the climate crisis is building energy efficiency retrofits. However, there are problems. Building in-person audits are pretty expensive, about 10 cents per square foot for a basic walkthrough and analysis of utility bills, according to ASHRAE. And also, you know, they pose health risks. During this pandemic crisis, most auditors and contractors weren't able to get into buildings. On the flip side, we know that there are an increasing number of remote energy analysis tools to target buildings for retrofits, but most of these tools require domain expertise. Simulation and modeling is time-consuming and complex. So the researchers at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, with support from the US Department of Energy, my next slide here. So the challenges and the problem arises for those that have large building portfolios, tens, hundreds, and thousands of buildings. And there are a lot of these entities out there. You know, I think about the state of California, which has a 500 building portfolio for courthouses. The price of level 1 basic audits for those buildings would be more than $500,000. And as we increase the size of the portfolio, we increase the cost associated with audits. So the solution to this, the US Department of Energy and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, in collaboration with Johnson Controls, have introduced the building efficiency targeting tool for energy retrofits. And this is a lightweight web app, and it replaces that basic level 1 audit, and it streamlines level 2 audits. On top of that, it uncovers very simple, no low-cost measures to cut energy costs in buildings about 5 to 10% portfolio-wide. So really important, we're focused on the portfolios here. So how Better works, very easy to use, simple inputs, building type, the location, the gross floor area, and 12 consecutive months of energy consumption, both electric and fossil. Better does a very quick analysis. We use change point models. We isolate the coefficients in the change point models. We benchmark them against peers. And we use that information to provide actionable portfolio level insights to improve energy usage, reduce carbon emissions, and cut operating costs. You can see here from the actionable portfolio insights picture, we're looking at an office building portfolio with about 26 buildings. Very substantial cost savings available, about 20%, $2.5 million on an annual basis. What Better also does is provide users with the top 5 energy efficiency actions they can take to capture those savings. And most of these are no-cost, low-cost operational improvements, along with some technology and structural recommendations. And it also, third on that graphic there in the lower right-hand corner, the tool tells you precisely which buildings in a portfolio offer the highest cost, energy, and carbon savings. So you can zero in on those buildings as well as the systems and equipment that need to be improved. The timing for this tool, we think, is pretty apropos. There are really strong motivators right now for improving operating energy and carbon performance in buildings. You can see on the left there a graphic from the Institute for Market Transformation, which indicates US city, county, and state policies related to benchmarking energy performance in buildings, disclosing that information publicly, and in some cases moving beyond to require audits, tune-ups, retro-commissioning. There's about 12 billion square feet of US space involved in these programs, 91,800 buildings, and growing really rapidly. I think we're going to see more and more of these types of regulations emerging across the country. And on the right, in particular, some of our leading cities are really getting aggressive about improving energy performance. Chicago and New York City have introduced letter grading or stars that need to be posted on the facade of a building to indicate how energy efficient that building is. So I can promise you there are a lot of our clients and colleagues with buildings, large portfolios in these cities that are really sweating bullets. There are fines for not complying. When you think about the New York City restaurant letter grading system and the impact that had on attendance or visits to restaurants, and they're quite nervous. Plus, there's going to be carbon taxes in New York. So a really changing regulatory landscape, and I think a bit of an untold story that's motivating large portfolio owners and operators. China is right alongside the U.S. as always. We're great competitors and great cooperators. And China has introduced the building energy saving tool BEST, which is developed with the same principle as Better, but it's designed specifically for the Chinese market, which is fantastic. It was developed by China Academy of Building Research. And you can see here, this is in Chinese, but you can get an idea here as to how they're communicating and targeting buildings for retrofits, and again, using data and simple analysis to push innovative technologies and solutions into the market for the building stock. So advantages of these types of remote retrofit analysis tools. From my perspective, these are really the game changers. The simplicity of the data inputs, not requiring large amounts of data regarding the U value of a building envelope, the number of ballasts or lamps in a particular building, the really short runtime to be able to analyze the performance of buildings in just seconds. Portfolio insights, so being able to quantify the size and the makeup of energy efficiency opportunities, not just for one building, but for hundreds or thousands of buildings in a single run. Not requiring a lot of domain expertise to use, so these are very easy to use tools. Focusing on actual operational CO2 reductions, very critical. We're not looking at theoretical carbon dioxide emission reductions under ideal settings, but really focusing on cutting those operational energy and CO2 emissions. And finally, looking and offering no cost interventions that can be implemented across the portfolio. So the potential impact, if these tools like BEST and Better are deployed globally, we think we could reduce emission about 165 megatons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. That's a pretty small, very conservative estimate. And we're looking at how we would deploy these with our channel partners like World Resources Institute and C40. An additional 50 to 75% of embodied GHG emissions could be avoided in every case where a building is retrofit as opposed to demolished and then reconstructed. So really retrofits are key to addressing the climate crisis. And finally, these types of tools can help address and preserve vulnerable energy efficiency jobs and support the post-COVID-19 economic recovery. To be able to do a basic level 1 audit remotely allows those energy efficiency contractors and auditors to keep their jobs even when they can't get on site. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss these evolving energy analysis tools. And for more information, you can go to some of the resources here. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Carolyn did prove this is not a boring topic. It's not, not overly complex. I'm sure you could probably really geek out on this and would lose 90% of us, but this is really fascinating. So now we're going to travel even further west, because Clay's here in the East Coast, Carolyn's California, now going further across the ocean to Jing Hou in Beijing. Jing, could you share your screen, and then we will hear your talk about what's happening in China.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see my screen and hear my clearly?
Yes, I can see your screen and I can hear you clearly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me, and so happy to hear insights from Clay and Carolyn. So my topic today, I'd like to share the decarbonization pathways of building sector in China towards the carbon neutrality targets. So I believe everyone on Earth know this. Our president made this pledge to aim to have CO2 emissions peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. And afterwards, in the last 6-7 months, President Xi Jinping repeated this announcement, the targets several times in different occasions, and announced the further commitments for 2030 with some detailed KPIs. And this formed, for the first time, formed a long-term Chinese climate targets. And how these targets will be delivered. Actually, there is a CAP system. The CAP is Climate Action Planning System. So we could see here is a very simple diagram shows the process, which from the top targets for climate change from the global level, which is the Paris Agreement targets for now, and then delivered to the countries. So for example, China, and then it go top down from country level to provincial levels to city level, then to district level. There's a special line. And for each level, there should be a CAP, their climate action plan to deliver their climate targets. And at the same time, there will also be some sectoral climate action plan, which will include energy sector, building, transport, waste, etc. And in each climate action plan, both mitigation and adaptation targets and actions should be considered. So today we basically focus on the building sector. And as we all know, and also like Clay and both Clay and Carolyn mentioned a little bit, the share of building sector in final energy and emissions, we could see from the data from IEA. Globally, building sector, when we consider both operational phase and construction phase, the building sector is responsible for 35% of total final energy consumption and 38% of total CO2 emissions. And in China, these numbers will be larger than the global average. But when we come into details for China, we could say that mostly we consider operational phase more in most occasions, because embodied emissions are just an emerging topic in China. So when we consider operational emissions from building sector, we could see in China, the current data is about 22%, while US should be 35. I just saw Carolyn shared a 39, and the EU will be around 40%. And we could see the gap between China and the Western developed countries. So this also indicate a rising room for Chinese building sector emission. And the right diagram shows that the structure of these emissions and energy consumptions from building sector. We could also see when the number Carolyn mentioned, the 51% of the total emissions, CO2 emission, actually included the building materials, which were calculated into the industry emissions in China at this moment. But now currently, because the 30-60 targets, building sector start to consider both operational phase and the building material and the construction period phase as a whole. So these numbers all show the whole picture of the building sector. And another diagram I'd like to share is another wider context for Chinese building sector. When we all know that China is the largest CO2 emission in the world now, but when we compare its building per capita electricity consumption with some developed country, we could see there is a significant gap between China and the developed countries. That's also indicated that that's actually because China is still in the process of urbanization, and the living standards include the indoor building environment are still rising. So that's also indicate a large room to rise in this sector in China. This all pose a large challenge for Chinese building sector to peaking its CO2 emission and achieve the neutrality goal as soon as possible. So based on some researchers, which we could see in the right diagram, which come from a McKinsey's report, the top 12 opportunities by action area include that building energy efficiency is actually one of the largest opportunity to cut down the CO2 emissions, especially working together with the power or energy sector decarbonization. So in China, actually, with my information, currently there was some strategic pathways towards decarbonization. I'd like to quickly share. So there were, first one is from the single building or individual building level. We could say for new buildings, as Clay said, there are a large number of new buildings constructed every year worldwide, and also as well as in China. So the most efficient way to improve buildings, new buildings energy efficiency is through the building energy efficiency codes or standards. So China has 5 climate zones. From 1986, China has its first building energy design standards, and afterwards it have a strategy. We call it the 3-step strategy, but now the 3-step has totally finished, and with the 3 steps, Chinese built its standards, building energy efficiency standard system, and it's quite mature now. It covers both residential building and the commercial and the municipal building. These 2 building types in China together called public buildings, and it includes national level standards, which indicates the minimum mandatory level, and also it covers the local standards, which must be higher energy efficiency than the national one. It have mandatory and voluntary standards, and it covers the whole climate zones and the whole process from the design to construction to operation and even renovation. Yeah, so, and the last point also show that in China, there is another characteristic is together with the building energy efficiency standards, China also parallelly adopting the green building standards at the same time. So with all the three-step strategy have been finished, completed. So China now have new targets on new strategies, which they are adopting nearly zero energy buildings. And also there is another mandatory standards, which named the General Planning for Building Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, which is going to release this year. This one has been finished. And the last one is the zero carbon building technical guidance. This one is just started, but estimated to be released within this year as well. So these are the new targets for Chinese new building energy efficiency standard systems. And these standards were accelerated by the 30-60 targets actually. And I'd also like to quick mention this program. This is a C40 China Building Program pilot city, Beijing. Its focus area is the new residential building energy efficiency improvement. So it released the Chinese first design standard for ultra low energy residential buildings, and works well. And the energy saving rate is more than 90%. And for existing buildings, I'm so happy to hear both Clay and Carolyn's, they shared the pathways and also the tools for existing buildings. So I'd like to quickly went through some works or policies underway in China. So Chinese government initiated large-scale renovation programs to both residential buildings and existing commercial and public buildings. And large-scale buildings have finished their renovation. But this work will be a routine work in the coming years, because once the building had been constructed, then it turns out to be existing building and needed to be improved energy efficiency step by step, unless the building is designed and constructed and operated as net zero carbon buildings. And the second one is quota system. So Beijing, as the first city in China, implemented a mandatory quota system to its existing commercial and public buildings, which over 3,000 square meters. And this cut down a lot CO2 emissions. And this policy will continue in the coming years and become more and more stringent. And another one is benchmarking policy, which Carolyn just also mentioned. Shanghai Changning is the first district in China implemented a benchmarking policy to its existing commercial and public buildings to improve their energy performance. And some other program I'd like to mention is one is Better Building Challenge Program. Actually, this one is my organization, the China Association of Building Energy Efficiency, built the platform of Chinese Better Building Challenge Program. And this program is learned experience from the US. And the Changning, Shanghai district also joined this challenge program as a region under the C40 China Building Program support. And the last one I'd also like to mention is carbon trade scheme. Actually, Shenzhen piloted the building carbon trade scheme in China a few years ago. But I think we could learn more from some city like Tokyo's cap and trade program to improve existing buildings performance more. Except the single building level works actions, actually Chinese government or Chinese local cities also started to focus on community or district level from the single building to regional energy efficiency. So the new targets, together with the single building standards, there will be a zero carbon community assessment standards. This one have been started and will be finished within this year. And also C40 is working with Europe, developing a global guidebook on green and thriving districts, reaching net zero and creating livable neighborhoods. So these are all very valuable practice and efforts towards the zero carbon community especially for new communities. And for old communities, actually in China, now we have the old community renovation and old city renewal programs, which are focused on the renovation of old communities built before 2000. And it works very well. I'd like to show a few pictures of what had been done under this program. A lot of communities have got benefited through this. And the third emerging area is actually clean or green construction area. This one actually is targeting to tackling with the embodied emission in building sector. Chinese government, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development, initiated 2 pilot programs last December. One is green building materials pilot city program. Another one is the green construction pilot city province program. So these are all emerging new focus. And the fourth one is building and electrification and building energy flexibility. I think Clay made very good points on this aspect, on this field. So I'd like to skip this one, but only like to mention that the Chinese building electrification rate have been rising through the past 2 decades and will continue to grow. And in this area, we also needed to consider about the renewable energy use. And renewable energy, especially the solar PV plus the storage, will be a solution for net zero carbon buildings actually. And in this area, we also we've saw a lot cooperation between Chinese cities and international cities. For example, the CIRC-B, under CIRC-B, there was some renewable integration and DC buildings, that kind of corporations. And under C40 China building program, we also see renewable energy use in building sector pilot cities. And last one is green finance and business models or market-oriented mechanisms, which could provide solutions for the financing issue for building sector decarbonization. So green finance is a new topic and a new focus for Chinese cities. And Central Mohurd also had some pilot cities in this area, like Huzhou or Qingdao. And together with green finance and this kind of innovation, the public policy from different level government need also be optimized in the coming years. For example, the subsidies, tax incentives, or other supportive public policies. Regard to US-China cooperation, we all see the positive signals from the US-China joint statement addressing the climate crisis. And in that one, one of the 8 areas is the energy efficient buildings. So I'm very positive to see the cooperation coming from both countries, and look forward to participate more with partners from both sides. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jing. Yeah, so you got, that's a pretty slide, but if wow, I like ending on an optimistic note. I think it was really helpful, Jing, that you really mapped out basically, Clay's nodding, everything that needs to happen. And And one place to start is that, well, maybe Clay or Carolyn, you can maybe jump in here. But so one of the last things that she talked about was the green finance and some of the plans that are there. And we know here in the US that the Biden administration has been talking about, they want to imbue carbon neutrality work across all sectors. What are we seeing in terms of maybe the federal or the state level in terms of the financing for some of this? Because a lot of the things you were talking about, Clay, as I mentioned, they weren't low cost, no cost. You go ahead, Clay, if you want to jump in.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to congratulate both Carolyn and Jing. Great presentations. Really covered the gamut. Yeah, the Biden administration in their American Jobs, Act, really have targeted, 2 million highly efficient, residential and commercial buildings, and over 4 years. That's a lot. If you do the math, that would be a renovation rate many times larger than we currently have here. And they're setting rather high targets as well for the level of efficiency and the carbon reduction within those buildings. Of course, they're building on top of what we've already seen in cities and states for many years. I think one of the best policies is in New York City. It's called Local Law 97, which is a building performance standard. They started exactly as Carolyn suggested, with first you will send your energy data up. Oh, we will benchmark you against other buildings. Oh, you will have to do audits. Oh, you will now be compared with other buildings. And no one should be surprised that essentially they've created a policy now which will require all buildings, large and medium housing, as well as medium and large commercial buildings, to meet a declining target of energy efficiency, or face a rather significant compliance fee. The compliance fee is $268 per ton of carbon. That is not insignificant. If you look around the world and what cap and trade programs and California or the Northeast, the cost of carbon is $40, $50 a ton. This is significantly greater than that. What this will do is it will require 25% of all these buildings in New York City to actually make a improvement by 2024. Now, they could be low cost, no cost. It could be LED lighting. It could be commissioning. But 5 years later, in 2029, 75% of the buildings will have to make improvements, and they're going to have to be a bit deeper. You'll see fossil fuel boilers being converted into heat pumps, because it's carbon, not just energy reductions there. The total investment required is on the order of, perhaps $20 billion. So they have put in place policies such as PACE, property assessed clean energy financing, where actually, these improvements can be financed through a surcharge on property taxes. The nice thing about this particular approach is that property taxes, these type of assessments pass through to the tenants. One of the challenges everywhere in the world is that this sort of owner-tenant mismatch between incentives. Does a building owner make improvements and then all the benefits, cost benefits, go to the tenant? If a tenant makes improvements, do the benefits go to the owner? This sort of solves that problem. So what we're seeing is that cities that are taking these actions, and right now, Washington, D.C. was the first, Boston is soon. Okay, it'll be carbon. I was on their technical advisory committee. St. Louis, Missouri. Yes, St. Louis, Missouri, and the entire state of Washington are adopting these policies. They're bundling these green finance and other financial models. They're encouraging energy savings performance contracting to implement these things so that the improvements can be paid over time. A critical enabler for what we need to do.
That was amazing. You are a walking encyclopedia on energy efficiency trends here. I like it. But just quick follow up, and then I want the other two to start asking you some questions. But do you see this as, it seems like how you were describing it, very much kind of city led? I mean, the feds are obviously, there are incentives from on top. Do you think it's really the cities that are going to drive this?
Well, that is one difference between China and the United States, right? I love the chart, Jing, where you showed the top down, right, from a national climate action plan to a provincial climate action plan, down to a city, down to a district, and down to an individual who really needs to set those goals as part of their 5-year plan. And the bottom up is, how do I take individual buildings and districts and things such as that? In the US, things like building codes are actually municipal. There are states can put in place building codes, but they're essentially, generally, based on a national model code, but they can be more strenuous, like in California, Title 24. Some states in the United States don't even have a model building code, okay? So it's very much up to local government. And as we like to say, when it really hits the road, it is cities where a lot of the action is going to take place. It is financial institutions in those cities that have to finance the retrofits. It is the policies. Plus, don't forget that a key driver is leadership by example. If in a city, every new city building is green certified, if a city will only lease space in a green certified building, if a city, when they build new facilities, make it as close to net zero carbon as they can, that kind of leadership can really drive market transformation. So I do think that is a difference.
Well, maybe Jing, and feel free to jump in whenever you want, Carolyn, this one. So Jing, I think kind of Clay was kind of hinting at too, that is kind of one of my questions too, is like, what do you see as some of the obstacles like facing cities in China to try to, I mean, it's great that there's a lot of top down, I don't know, shall we say pressure or incentives, but what are some obstacles that you're seeing that, or maybe an examples of some cities getting over some of these obstacles to really pushing the energy efficiency in their buildings?
Thank you, Jennifer. In this, and it's very helpful to hear Clay's insights. And actually, at the sea in China, since I used to work closely with the MOHUR system, so it's true that there is a top-down process, and there is also combined with bottom-up. But sometimes, if, for example, the 30/60 targets, if there is no such targets from the President Xi Jinping, the central government, then I don't think there will be a lot. I'd say a lot of actions won't be accelerated. So sometimes I think I found some good side from this kind of approach, and the obstacles from my observe in China is the hardest part is the local city government, who is needed to develop such a roadmap or implementation plan. They are facing some challenge to do that, because China is still in the process of urbanization, like what I mentioned. So a lot of people or families, their living standard are not as high as they should be, actually. So this kind of demand should be met, actually, but so they needed on one side to consider this kind of reasonable demand reasonable needs. But at the other hand, they need to consider how to peak the sectoral emission, how to set the roadmap towards neutrality. So it's kind of very hard for them to do so. And for some developed countries or some cities from developed countries, I also read the roadmap for New York City. I saw it's very good, but it's like they've already peaked and they are just on the decreasing road,
Mm-hmm.
and they could accelerate that process, but they've already peaked. But in China, most cases they are still in the left of the peaking point. So that's made the Chinese city harder to do such roadmap of implementation plan. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. Well, so Clay and Carolyn, I know that both of your WRI and LBNL, that you guys have been looking at how China and other countries can get to net zero. I mean, because I think she makes a valid point that their cities are still growing, and they're also so big. Clay, I know that WRI had a report not too long ago that you guys are laying out a roadmap. Give us some of your wisdom here.
Yeah. So Jing is absolutely right. That is changing. I mean, you are chasing an accelerating train as opposed to bringing one to a slow stop. So that is obviously a bigger challenge. What we found in our pathways is fairly universal. We did work and analyzed India, South Africa, China, a number of other countries, and the first priority is in fact energy efficiency, because that's how we address this growth. If we could make every new building use half as much energy, we can have twice as many buildings and still peak, right? And I think a real opportunity actually in China is to focus on the public buildings, where the cities have more influence, and public buildings mean something different in China than they do in the US. It's both commercial as well as municipal buildings. I mean, wouldn't it be great if the first sector to peak before 2060 could be public buildings, right? And you could do that by putting in place very stringent building codes that go beyond the national building code. Beijing already has a building code that is more stringent than the national building code. There are new building codes and standards being developed that are near zero, that are ultra low, and in the future we'll see building codes that are in fact net zero carbon. So that would be great. And leadership by example. New municipal buildings should not only exceed the legal limits, but really represent demonstrations and pilots of what's possible. Integrate that renewable energy. Replace fossil fuel heating with heat pumps, things like that. When the grid becomes 100% green, then all buildings that are net zero ready, that have transitioned from fossil fuel heating, are in a good position to ride that curve down. We want to get to a place where existing buildings are retrofitted to be net zero ready, waiting for a greener grid. Every time the grid gets greener, those buildings get greener. And new buildings, we need to very quickly get on that so that we're not contributing to a challenge, we're contributing to the solution there. So I think that's how we can bend the curve and accelerate that drop.
Carolyn, I'm sure you have some things to add here.
I do. Well, Clay always does a wonderful job. One of the things I would say, on the early peaking challenge for China, is I lived in Beijing for 6 years, and I worked very closely with China Academy of Building Research, China Association of Building Energy Efficiency. And one of the things that I think is a misconception about China is, misacknowledged or unacknowledged, is the entrepreneurial spirit that exists in China. And I would say that there's a real potential to kind of unleash that further in the Chinese economy through voluntary programs, through market-based mechanisms. So Jing presented this incredible overview of the policy system in China from the top down, and absolutely amazing. At the same time, I see how efficient entrepreneurs are in coming up with, digital technologies that could be used to, through using machine learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera, to draw down operational emissions in existing Chinese buildings, which is my passion, cutting that operational carbon emission. And, I look at, Better and Best Plus, which were developed in tandem in the US and China. And I think about, okay, could we take that to the next level? And, China uses machine learning or artificial intelligence or satellite imagery, ground source imagery, to create digital twins of cities where we can see those buildings that are red hot and using more carbon than they should be, because it's the operating carbon that we really need to cut, and say, okay, that building right there needs to be upgraded, and here's the 10 things we need to do, combinations of advanced technologies and operational improvements to drive down those emissions. So I'd love to see an unleashing of the entrepreneurism really globally, but particularly in China, because I think it's there, and they could really contribute some innovation and breakthroughs in climate technology. So that's from the Berkeley Labs, San Francisco Bay side of the thought process.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to pile on to that, because I agree with Carolyn. You know, in the 13th plan, there was a lot of focus on green buildings. Actually, there was a target. Jing can correct me, but I believe it was 50% of new buildings should be green certified to the 3-star thing. There was also a focus on pilots and demonstrations of green materials of construction and the renovation of public buildings. Didn't see that same focus. And then also, with COVID-19, the entire world is focusing on how to build back better, how to use economic stimulus to not just build back quickly, but to build back better, improving infrastructure and addressing these greater challenges like climate change. And I would just say that for anyone who cares, green construction and retrofit generate between 8 and 21 jobs per $1 million of investment, and fossil fuel exploration is like 3. So there's huge leverage in both renewable energy and energy efficiency. So if you look at this through a lens of, I want to address these challenges we face around climate and stimulate the economy, the best place to do it is probably buildings. But if you also look at the China plan around stimulus funding, there's a high-tech flavor to it. There is a focus on 5G and broadband communications and expanding the digital technologies. There is a focus on artificial intelligence and data analytics and machine learning and things like that. If you combine what is a national economic development focus with an environmental focus, you end up with exactly what Carolyn was talking about, using those technologies, not just for streaming the latest apps, but also for making environmental improvements. So couldn't agree more.
Yeah, one thing that maybe to ask for all of you here, so just to kind of shift it just a little bit, but not much, that Clay, you gave some examples about how some buildings, how they're like the Maui and in Norway, that they're able to generate renewable energy for themselves and to sell it to the grid. And I was curious, Jing, I know that when we've been looking at this kind of, decentralized, renewable power, that it hasn't been developed. I mean, how is that going in China? Are we seeing buildings is the grid ready for it? Is the grid ready to take on some of that renewable energy that buildings might generate?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Happy to talk this. Actually, from technology aspect, I don't think there is obstacle for building sector to adopt more renewable energy, including solar PV, solar thermal, and heat pumps technologies. All of these technologies have been piloted and implemented well in different climate zones. But for like solar PV will be a new focus during the 14th five-year plan. Some information it seems like there will be a program focused on the roof for the Chinese building sectors in towns, and maybe also include rural area. I believe this technology the renewable energy will be the adoption will be increasing in China in the coming years. In the rural area, especially, I'd like to mention a little bit, will be some solutions will be tailored for Chinese rural area based on the renewable energy, because they have more rooms to use PVs. They have more rooms of flexibility and also that's also provide more resilience.
Well, one thing, we just have a couple minutes left, so maybe since Jing's last slide was about how the U.S.-China statement on the climate crisis included energy efficient buildings. I'll start with you, Clay. What are some opportunities that you think that where the U.S. and China can? We've had kind of a bumpy relationship for the past few years, but in terms of energy efficient buildings, what are some kind of collaboration or parallel, or maybe let's race to the top stuff that the two countries could be doing in this space?
I love the race to the top stuff. That was a nice touch.
Yeah, buildings race too.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And again, thanks for inviting me to this. I do see a real opportunity for collaboration there. One is that, most buildings in the US exist. Many buildings in the future are yet to be built. So there's different market dynamics there. Jing mentioned a very interesting project around using DC voltage directly from solar PV and directly from storage. There are opportunities, as Carolyn has noted, to bring in entrepreneurship, bring in new models. Some of the greenest buildings in the world are actually in China. Shenzhen, IBR, CABR. Those are really great examples. So it has to be a good idea to share each other's best practices from both a policy and a technology perspective. And I scanned the press release just like everyone, and I saw item 4, building efficiency, and I said, yes, let's do it.
I pictured happy dance in your house there when that came out. Carolyn?
Gosh,
it's your wish. What do you want? Make it happen.
What do I want? So I am so blown away by China's energy efficiency financing infrastructure. You brought that up earlier, Jennifer. They have the most comprehensive policy suite in the entire world. And I think there's so much that the rest of the world could learn from China. And in the United States in particular, I did see a recent headline saying the US needs a national green bank to finance energy efficiency projects, renewable energy projects across the US. And so I think the US and China could do more to learn from one another and innovate and introduce new financing systems for energy efficient buildings. I think that would be a great area to work with China on.
And Jing, what's your wish for how you see some good opportunities that were this race to the top on buildings where we could come together?
Yeah. Actually, the first point is actually I see the market-oriented mechanisms, because I think Chinese government mostly because building energy efficiency kind of have the public goods, the characteristics. So they needed to provide subsidies and incentives from government to figure out the incremental costs of such kind of problems. So, but that's a huge barrier also for government financial system. So I actually, in the past decades, Chinese government, from the central government to local cities, I heard a lot of times they need to learn more experience practices from Western countries about market mechanisms or sustainable business models. So I think these are what US and EU and developed countries do better. So I look forward to see corporations in this area.
Great. And we do know that, I mean, like you've been working with C40, and WRI has an office in China, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab Clean Energy Group, decades of work with Chinese partners. So come on, people, you all have to bring it together, and we can see this is a really kind of fruitful area, which is not like no one's giving aid and assistance to each other, but just, creating good business. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming today and sharing, you were my energy efficient gurus here. Also want to remind people that on this coming Friday, we have Kelly Sims Gallagher from Tufts University, who we're going to sit down for a half-hour green tea chat to talk a little bit more deeply into US-China climate relations. And next month, we have a true race to the top with a conversation about electric vehicles in the US and China, which now I think is clear from your conversations today. Electric vehicles are also part of the building energy efficiency stuff. I love integration. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a really good day and good evening in China. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.